slide it around. Shady part. As long as I leave it unzipped, it's usually good.
About to make this speech tonight, first really big campaign speech since all this happened, and it will be very closely watched. James, if you are still with me, it'll be a very closely watched speech tonight from Kamala Harris.
Yeah, because she is carrying the torch. I have to say, I was in Wilmington, Delaware yesterday, and we spoke around that speech that she delivered on the friendliest of territory. Clearly, she was in campaign HQ, a transition point at which she addressed staff, and things changed. The name on the ticket, the name at the top of the ticket changed, and so the strategy changes. It's all about Kamala Harris working to her strengths and defending her weaknesses. And I suppose the central question for doubters in the Democratic movement, and there are many, is how has she changed? How has she changed from the Kamala Harris that 4 years ago wanted to be the presidential nominee and didn't come close? She dropped out of the contest when she couldn't even be the front runner in her own home state. She was deemed not to be the performer who could deliver power for the Democrats 4 years ago. What has changed? What do we see in Kamala Harris in 2024 that she didn't have 4 years ago and that let her down on the political stage 4 years ago? She will need gravitas, that inner core of strength going forward, because we already hear the attack lines from her Republican opponents, and it will be tough. She is a woman of color standing to be president. There will be opposition. There will be attack ads, an attack campaign laced in part with racism, misogyny. She will need to be tough. She will need to be a performer, and she will need to be a winner, clearly.
Yeah, but James, a very good point. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to stick with these pictures. Niall Stanage is with me here, and Niall, we're just hearing also significantly that the two most senior Democrats in this building behind us are about to speak and presumably endorse Kamala Harris. So it's all coming together. But I guess going forward for Kamala Harris, I mean, she can make the campaign speeches, but she's going to be tested. She's going to be tested in possible debate, should I say probable debate. She's going to be tested when she goes on the networks and faces interviewers who are going to scrutinize her policy, personality, and so forth. It's going to be tough.
It is, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of Democratic excitement right now, but this is not going to be easy. For a start, Kamala Harris is lagging former President Trump in the polls by about 3 points, roughly the same as Biden was doing. Her favorability ratings, Mark, are really very poor. She's about 20 points underwater in that respect. Now, can that be made up as we see this gusher of cash coming into her campaign coffers? We see so much excitement in the Democratic ranks. Possibly, but this is not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination.
Right, and just the significance of what we may be about to see, which is the, in fact, we can see Chuck Schumer is speaking. Let's have a listen to what he's got to say.
It's a happy day, what can I say? Together, we will keep and hopefully grow the Senate majority, and under future Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, we will win back the House. Democrats are moving forward stronger and more united than ever before. In just the last 36 hours, I have seen a surge of enthusiasm from every corner of our party, uniting behind Vice President Harris. An enthusiasm felt in every corner of the country, and it's contagious among Democrats. The volunteers, the small contributions, they're just pouring in ways even beyond our expectations. Now, we all know that Vice President Harris has a tremendous record to run on. And now begins the next chapter in our quest to make sure Donald Trump does not become president. Today, with one voice, we speak about the dangers he presents to working families, to our country, and to our democracy. We see very clearly how nervous the Republicans are about our new nominee. Well, they ain't seen nothing yet. Last night, Vice President Harris secured a majority of delegates. Today, in Wisconsin and across America, we begin our next chapter, and it will be our best yet. Vice President Harris will beat Donald Trump and become the next president of the United States of America. Applause. Hakeem.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. Joe Biden is a patriotic American. Joe Biden is a heroic American. Joe Biden is a great American. Joe Biden will go down in American history as one of the most consequential presidents of all time. President Joe Biden has made the selfless decision to pass the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, who is ready, willing, and able to lead us into the future. Kamala Harris and her candidacy has excited and energized the House Democratic Caucus, the Democratic Party, and the nation. Vice President Harris has earned the nomination from the grassroots up and not the top down. She is ready, she is willing, she is able to energetically and emphatically lead America into the future. Kamala Harris is a common sense leader who knows how to deliver real results for hardworking American taxpayers. Kamala Harris is a courageous leader who has worked hard throughout her entire career to keep our communities safe. Kamala Harris is a compassionate leader who will build an affordable economy that makes life better for everyday Americans. Kamala Harris will fight for our freedom. Kamala Harris will fight for our families. Kamala Harris will fight for our future. I'm proud to strongly endorse Kamala Harris to be the 47th President of the United States of America. We're going to hold the Senate. We're going to win the House. We're going to elect Kamala Harris as our next president in November.
Thank you. Yes. Well, questions on this subject? Yes.
Leader, I know you said that this was a bottom-up process, but Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States. There was no other competition. This is going to be selected by party delegates, insiders, essentially. What's your case to the American people and to the Democratic voters that voted for Joe Biden that this isn't a coronation?
The bottom line, it was a bottom-up process. People just rallied right to her side. The enthusiasm in this big, diverse, representative party was amazing. It was palpable. You could cut it with a knife. Yes.
Schumer, are you worried that Republican efforts will bubble up in states to keep Harris off the ballot, to leave Joe Biden on the ballot?
No. Yes.
Leader Schumer, when are you guys going to meet with the Vice President?
Soon.
Leader Schumer,
See, we're getting more questions in with short answers.
you had a number of conversations with the President over the last several weeks. You went up to Delaware. That was described as a bit of an emotional meeting of sorts. I'm wondering, did you ever personally ask him not to run for re-election?
Look, what I would say is that the President...
So there we are, Chuck Schumer there, the Senate Majority Leader, endorsing Kamala Harris, and earlier the Minority Leader, the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, doing the same, and they are significant endorsements, not least because they are backing a woman and hoping that this candidate can keep a high number of Democrats in this building behind us, because that's what it comes down to in the end. What do you make of what they had to say?
I think this is the Democratic establishment being fully behind, completely behind Kamala Harris. I don't think they had any reluctance to back her. The only reluctance was that they didn't want this to be seen as a coronation. Yeah. Now, I'm not sure if they've been able to disabuse people of that.
The first question Schumer got was, why is this a coronation? How do you justify it?
Exactly.
Effectively.
And I guess their justification would be, well, we left it open for a while, no one came forward. It did become clear that the credible potential challengers to Harris had all endorsed her. They clearly figured there was no point in trying to challenge her at the convention. So the other thing I thought was interesting, Mark, was how quickly Chuck Schumer pivoted from praise for Harris to the kind of hits we were talking about on former President Trump, the idea that he's a danger to democracy. Yeah. When House Leader Jeffries came up, he was more directed on Harris herself, as if he were almost introducing her, even though she's the sitting vice president, to a wider public. Schumer very much pressing the anti-Trump button pretty fast.
Yeah. And as we're looking at Air Force One, and as I keep repeating, Joe Biden is about to return to the White House. He's got this speech tomorrow. So you've got Kamala Harris campaign speech, really, you know, the figure for the future for the Democrats, and she'll be arguing about the future. Joe Biden, in a sense, will want to be arguing about the past to the extent that his legacy will be the important thing to him now.
Absolutely, and his legacy is really everything to him now. The argument that was made to him to stand aside was a protection of that legacy. Don't let the legacy go away or be decimated by a defeat to Trump in November. He will also be arguing for his own record, and he has a number of domestic accomplishments there that he likes to talk about. So I think it'll be partly about the protection of the legacy, and also, you know, we have heard the president on social media talk about wanting to finish the job. He doesn't want to become irrelevant. He wants to say, I'm still in power for several more months.
Yeah. Okay, Niall, for now, thank you very much. There you can see on the right of your picture, Kamala Harris arriving in Milwaukee for her speech tonight. On the left, Air Force One as it awaits Joe Biden. And I can give you some news from Joe Biden's doctor, who says now that Joe Biden is free from COVID. And I think he also said that he never had a fever. Anyway, he's free from COVID, which is perhaps not unexpected given that he is going to return to the White House in the coming hour. We will be back with more on all this after the break.
This is a really interesting report that we've created, and it's using state-of-the-art modelling to understand the influence of
joy. Obviously, the past month has been very, very hard for us. So this is a welcome avalanche of relief.
Have you managed to speak to her in the last 24 hours or so?
I'm speaking with her tomorrow, actually. I was on a group call with her, but it wasn't individual, but we will be speaking tomorrow. I have been speaking with people very, very close with her, almost on an hourly basis. This is a team effort. I actually just raised $1 million for her, $1 million. This has never happened to me in a single day. Actually, it was within 5 hours. So it speaks to the palpable excitement and passion that people are feeling. I raised 1.1 million for President Biden, but that took me 6 days and a lot of teeth pulling, if you know what I mean, a lot of persuasion. In this case, people were just like forking it over.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of excitement now in the Democratic ranks, but the real question is she the real deal? You know her well. Is she up to it? Are you convinced that she is up to the job ahead?
I'm here to tell everybody the truth because my credibility it's everything to me. And I will admit that at the beginning of her term, there might have been a few growing pains, but now she is a rock star. She has blossomed into this role. I've traveled with her. I've gone to her events, and everywhere she goes, the crowds go wild. And I'm a millennial, and she excites my generation and Gen Zers and women and anyone who cares about reproductive rights. She was on a reproductive freedoms tour, which is remarkably successful. It hammers away at the fact that Donald Trump, a sexual predator, mind you, appointed a third of the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade. And 2 more justices are now on the cusp of retirement. Do we really want to empower Trump to appoint 2 more justices? So Kamala Harris is going to be on the trail every single day, effectively litigating the case against this convicted felon and reminding Americans that it's not just the presidency at stake, it's our Supreme Court for the next generations.
Yeah, but here's the thing. This does look like being one of the nastiest campaigns in recent American political history. Can she cope with that? Can she deal with that, do you think?
She is a fighter. If you've seen her confirmation hearings with Brett Kavanaugh or even Bill Barr, Trump's attorney general, you would understand. She suffers no fools. She's a seasoned prosecutor, and she's relentless. She will do what it takes. We've seen that happen. We saw that during the debate. We saw that during the primary election in 2020. She's just very good at this and very good at prosecuting the case against Trump. She's out there every single day. She's in Wisconsin today, which is a swing state. She's shoring up the blue wall, which is Michigan, Wisconsin. Here I am in Pennsylvania. And I have to say, I hope she picks my friend, Governor Josh Shapiro. He would be absolutely outstanding, and he would bring the 19 electoral votes that we would need for the path to the White House.
Right, it's an interesting point because the pick of VP, Vice President, is going to be very important, isn't it? You think Josh Shapiro, is that because, well, he's relatively young, but is it because of where he's from, Pennsylvania?
Oh, beyond, well, I've known him I was just thinking about this. I've known him for 9 years now. I showed up on his doorstep when I was 24 years old, announced that I would be running for Congress. He actually took me seriously. And I saw on his bookshelf, actually on mine, there's a copy of Master of the Senate by Robert Caro. I saw that on his bookshelf, and I realized that he was my people. I knew that when I was 24, and of course I'm older now. But we bonded instantly, and we've been friends ever since. He's been a remarkable person. Not only is he the governor of an extremely crucial state, he's also an amazing leader. I don't know if you were paying attention, if people are aware of what happened at I-95 when our highway collapsed. The way that he handled that crisis was masterful. And he had a live stream of the fixes and all the repairs, and it was fixed in 2 weeks. In America, like infrastructure being fixed in 2 weeks in America is unheard of, but he did it as only Josh could.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see who Kamala Harris goes for. There are a number of governors out there who are lining up to do the job. I just want to point out to viewers that on the left of the screen is the Air Force One aircraft, and they seem to be getting into some sort of order at the bottom of the steps there, or maybe not. But Joe Biden is expected, Lindy, at Dover Air Force Base any moment now. So we're keeping an eye on that. He's got to fly back to Washington, to the White House. And Lindy, I just wonder, this speech he's got to make to the nation, how difficult will that be for Joe Biden?
It will be extremely difficult, I'm sure, because he's walking away from 5 decades of public service. This is what he wanted his entire life. Speaking of books, there's another one on my bookshelf, What It Takes, and it details the 1988 presidential election, of course, of which Joe Biden was a part, and then he had to leave that race, and then he had to leave this race. So I can't imagine how difficult this is. He's such a fundamentally decent guy. Sometimes over the last couple of days, I just sit there sometimes just like getting emotional, just thinking about the toll this must be taking on him. And yesterday, Kamala Harris was at Vice President Harris was at the campaign headquarters, and President Biden was on the line. And he said, "I love you. I'm watching you, kid. I'm not going anywhere." He said that to her, and it was so classic Joe Biden. And I'll love that man, as I'm sure millions will.
There were all sorts of questions, though, Lindy, about whether they actually got on.
Oh, the two of them? They definitely got on. And I certainly think so, especially in the past year, as her profile has risen and she's just like, she's grown into the role. I can't stress that enough. Like, yes, she had a few hiccups at the beginning of the term, but she has been phenomenal. And this is not just, I'm not on her payroll. I don't have to say any of this stuff. I sincerely believe it. She's gotten so much more effective, incisive, and eloquent on the campaign trail. She's becoming Kamala Harris, so to speak.
Yeah. And we're just seeing vehicles look like they're going to be pulling up at the Air Force One. This is Joe Biden, who has been in Delaware, at his house in Delaware for 6 or 7 days now, effectively out of sight. Still president, but out of sight, and suffering with COVID. And we're now told that by his doctor that the COVID has passed. He never had a fever, and that now he is fit to return to the White House. And he will be thinking, this is a president who knows that his days are numbered, and he will be thinking very closely about the next 6 months, because effectively he'll go to January. And he will want to be very busy in those 6 months, particularly, I imagine, because this is a politician who has been very keen on foreign affairs and foreign issues. He's been strong. Many would agree he's been strong on foreign affairs, but he will want in the next 6 months to do something about things like Gaza and the Middle East, and about things like Ukraine, where he could make a difference. He is still president. He still has power, and he could make a difference when it comes to those things. But there will be those, of course, who say that he is now the lamest of lame duck presidents because he has been forced out effectively by his party. I'm sure Jill Biden is there with him, his wife, huge influence. Niall Stanage is with me. Jill Biden, huge influence on President Biden, and she will no doubt have had a big say in what he decided.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a very fierce defender of the president, of course, and also a fierce protector of his dignity. And of course, that was the danger following the debate, and in the cataclysm that ensued, there was some suggestion that the president's dignity would be, very impaired if he went on to defeat.
Should we just let me interrupt, Niall? Can we hear what he's saying? Is he saying anything?
Trump? Can Harris beat Trump, Mr. President?
So can Harris beat Trump, Mr. President, I think was the shout. But Joe Biden walking up the steps of Air Force One, saluting and disappearing inside. Surprised Jill Biden's not with him, but we don't know what's going on. So he now has to get down to business because this speech, well, he's got to meet Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's got this speech.
Absolutely. Worth noting, perhaps, Mark, that this is, of course, the first time in some days that we have actually physically seen President Biden, and he had looked fragile shortly after his COVID diagnosis, holding the rail there as he went up into the plane, but not looking too bad for an 81-year-old man who has just recovered from COVID. As you say, a very intense couple of days between this speech, really talking about the reasons why he has stepped aside, and the Netanyahu visit.
No, we're just going to go back to Joe Biden just before he walked up the steps and just have a listen to what he did have to say. It wasn't very much. Let's have a listen.
Mr. President, how are you feeling?
How are you feeling?
How are you feeling?
What?
Come talk to us.
Come on.
How are you feeling since you dropped out of the race, sir?
How are you feeling about Harris's campaign?
Can Harris beat Trump? Can Harris beat Trump, Mr. President?
Yeah, can Harris beat Trump was the question at the end. The question's much more audible than what he had to say, but I think he was saying feeling well or to that effect. Nothing substantial from...
I've been in the position of those reporters where you're desperately trying to lure him over to speak at greater length, but it didn't work for them on that occasion.
Well, they do when they want to.
They do. When they have a message to
Trump
deliver.
actually often comes across, doesn't he? But Joe Biden, there we are, on his way back. It will have been a very frustrating time in many ways, being, waylaid with COVID, and yet, in a way, I guess, that would have given him time away from people shouting questions about what are you going to do every 10 minutes, and given him time to think and to talk to his advisors and to listen to people like Nancy Pelosi and so forth and make a decision. Was it inevitable in the end, do you think?
I think it was inevitable. I just don't think there was any way he could survive when his party had come to the conclusion that he was virtually certain to lose. But, perhaps the COVID thing did also allow him some degree of solitude to contemplate what is a momentous decision, both on a human level and a political level, by any reasonable standard.
Yeah, and this whole idea of legacy that I was just mentioning and foreign affairs and so forth. I mean, Netanyahu's presence, in a way, gives him a chance to get going on that and to try and reach some sort of, whether Benjamin Netanyahu is prepared to move on it, we'll see.
It does, because, firstly, those two men have quite a tortured relationship in some ways. The other thing is Biden's support of Netanyahu during the war in Gaza has caused massive schisms within his own party. And of course, earlier this year in the primary process, there were up to 20% of Democratic voters voting uncommitted, which was in effect the protest vote line against Biden's own policy in Gaza. But, clearly he can get back on the world stage instantly once he gets back to Washington, D.C.
Right. Now, for now, just hang on 1 second, because I just want to have a last word with Lindy Lee, who is the Democratic strategist that we've been talking to. Lindy, just a very quick word about Joe Biden and the speech. It will be all about his legacy, won't it?
It certainly will be, and I think his place in history is very secure. He will go down as one of the most selfless and patriotic presidents we've ever had. This is no easy feat. By doing this, he is now making the presidential campaign a true horse race. And the fact that she's raised more than $100 million since entering the race is absolutely jaw-dropping. It's just phenomenal. So I look forward to I look forward to the race and just seeing how Kamala Harris is really going to light a fire under Trump's butt. You can tell he's already nervous because he's trying to weasel out of the debate. You see that he's saying it's unfair and raising these objections. I don't blame him. He doesn't want to debate Kamala Harris.
Lindy, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being with us today. And Luke Nichter is a professor of history at Chapman University here in the United States. And it's quite a good moment to speak to you, Luke, because this is Joe Biden, serving president, pushed aside from running again. Just put this in a historic perspective for us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a beautiful shot I've been watching there of the president boarding the plane back for Washington. And I feel like we're watching history unfold right before our eyes. But I would say that the lesson of history, history doesn't always predict the future, but it does illuminate some possible future paths. We've been here before, to a large degree. I think 1968 is arguably the closest parallel to 2024. And I would say up until very recently, of all the similarities, the biggest differences were the lack of political violence this year and the fact that President Biden appeared to not want to do an LBJ and step down in the midst of the campaign. And even those two differences have now been erased between these 2 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. LBJ pulled out 68. He pulled out a lot earlier in the year, didn't he?
He did. There's two modern precedents since the war. Harry Truman in 1952 withdrew on March 29th, and LBJ was on March 31st. I've been saying for months that from a historical standpoint, month is the march to watch this year. And of course, it came and went without fanfare. That's really, I think, deals an advantage, but also a disadvantage to both sides. It's, of course, a disadvantage because Vice President Harris has to get up to speed, really at warp speed at this point, has very little time. But it's also discombobulated the Republicans a bit and thrown them off their message. Because while the Democrats know who they're running against, the message of the Trump side has had to be a little bit more general about the Biden record and the extent to which they can attach Harris to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been talking about legacy for the last few minutes as the plane moves out to the runway. Is there a danger, Luke, that Biden's career, long political career, 50 or 60 years, will that be defined by that disastrous debate and what followed it, calling Zelensky Putin and so forth? Is there a danger for Biden that that is what will define his career?
Well, at least in terms of history, the answer is probably not. As we all know, the news will change eventually, and memories will fade as we have new things to focus on. In 1968, LBJ was also lauded as a hero and as selfless in his service of the country and the party's future, and that lasted a few days. But what we do know is the attention will soon focus to the challengers. The spotlight moves on. I would expect that in President Biden's own view, he views his legacy very differently than we do. We've been focused since his debate with former President Trump. He's looking at this as the final chapter in a book in a 50-year career and doesn't want to be defined by a single chapter. So he has a much broader legacy and record to defend. And I think that's what we're going to hear in his speech, looking forward to his remaining months in office.
Yeah, and just very briefly, Luke, 20 seconds if you can. Is America ready for the first female president who could also, of course, make history?
Well, I think they are. But the challenge for Harris is that every statement she makes will be judged against past statements and any difference, perceived or otherwise, between her and Biden. For example, what happens when she's asked about Israel or Hamas? I think we will soon find out.
Luke Nichter, really appreciate your contribution. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
We're
Thank you.
watching as Joe Biden begins, not at all. Joe Biden begins the journey back from Delaware to Washington and to the White House. Niall Stanage is here with me, as he has been through the program. And so we're watching that plane now. We've been watching Kamala Harris arrive in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is the changing of the Democratic Guard happening right now in front of our eyes.
Very much so. When you and I started talking this afternoon, we were talking about the speed at which things move, Mark. And it's really noticeable just looking at these pictures how much the power is already shifting, it seems to me, from President Biden to Vice President Harris. Now the presumptive Democratic nominee, President Biden, about to get an aerial view of Washington in a little while, a city that he's going to be leaving one way or another in a matter of months, in some ways against his will, certainly not the way that he had envisioned it turning out. And Democrats, as many have said to you during the show today, really excited about the woman on the right of the screen there, Kamala Harris.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, thank you very much. Kamala Harris there on the right, arriving in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for a speech that we will be carrying very shortly. On the left of your screen, Joe Biden about to craft a speech, a very difficult speech, that will explain the reasons for what he has decided. So it is all happening here in the United States, all happening here in Washington. Our coverage continues at the top of the next hour.